Let's now take a look at developments in Guinea. The leader of the coup which ousted President Alpha Condé has said a new union government will be formed in weeks. President Condé remains in detention, but his fate is unclear. The UN, African Union and regional body ECOWAS have condemned the coup and called for a return to civilian rule. Muya Thomas reports.
Around midday on Sunday, the commander of the Special Forces of Guinea, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, launched an attack against the government, shootings close to the presidential palace in Conakry, the capital of the Republic of Guinea. The soldiers appeared on national TV claiming to have dissolved the government. The attempted takeover, the defense ministry of the country says, was thwarted and contained by the presidential guards and those loyal to President Alpha Condé. Casualties have also been recorded in the sporadic shooting. The military junta, under the name National Committee for Reconciliation and Development, says they acted because of the corruption and high rate of poverty in the country. They believe the constitutional amendment by the 83-year-old President Alpha Condé, which allowed him to run for a third term in office last year, was contestable and not inclusive. The junta promised to dissolve the constitution and start consultations to create a new and more inclusive one. The whereabouts of President Condé is still unknown. Alpha Condé was first elected in 2010 in the country's first democratic change of power since its independence from France in 1958. Meanwhile, ECOWAS has reaffirmed its disapproval of the unconstitutional change of government and wants the country to return to democracy. A statement from Nigeria's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, signed by a spokesperson, also asked those behind the coup attempt to restore constitutional order without delay and protect lives and property. The UN Secretary General and the African Union have also condemned the attack. Muya Thomas, TVC News, Abuja.
All right, Global Affairs analyst Collins Nweke joins me via Zoom to discuss political developments in Africa. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Nweke. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Now, condemnations have trailed to developments in Guinea. You see the UN, AU and ECOWAS also coming out to condemn recent developments there. But for you, I wonder what your reaction is to this development.
Well, I mean, it looks like a given, of course, that the international communities, and regional bodies, ECOWAS, African Union, and the rest of them, United Nations, United States, would condemn the coup attempts. That appears to be, a default position that is usually taken. But there are signs, as a matter of fact, that while that is publicly done because it is politically correct, I believe that a good number of them appear privately, to be encouraging what has happened, especially if you look at the streets of Conakry, the capital of Guinea, and see how jubilant the population is, who are welcoming the military officers and, actually welcoming the change because of, the kind of situation that they have been forced to live in under the ousted President Alpha Condé, particularly in the last 2 years. So, yes, there appear to be a very serious disconnect between the people of Guinea and the position that the international community has taken. But, I mean, that said, I think it's perfectly proper that when a government is, a perceived democratically elected government, though that is arguable in the case of Guinea, is toppled by the military with the force of the gun, that international organization and responsible individuals would have to condemn it. But I think this has happened so much and so often in the last, 11 years in Africa. 38 coups in total, 11 of which have succeeded. When it happens so often, I think it calls now for, more dialogue, proper conversation about how to respond beyond the politically correct response of condemning the coup.
When you say how to respond, what are we looking at here? Because a majority of these countries were said to have been seemingly practicing democracy. And so if we begin to see this kind of interventions from the military, what kind of response are we supposed to give?
Well, they have given the response that they are supposed to give, but I'm saying that those responses do not resonate with the man on the street in Conakry who are affected by the, misrule of the ousted government. And so one would imagine that the international organizations, beyond condemning it, which appears to be the right thing to do, that they would then begin to think about how to de-incentivize a coup attempt. Because believe you me, there are signs to believe that the coup plotters, the military juntas, are not quite doing this out of patriotic consideration. Because if you look at the statement that they have issued so far, for example, they are going to be there for 18 renewable months. So that means throwing the country into further uncertainty. They've also blanketly approved mining, which is actually what is at the center of all of this. I mean, as far as the international community is concerned, in terms of giving them reassurance that their contracts are not going to be disrupted. Okay, in one way it reassures investment and all of that. But on the other hand, the arm twisting behind some of those contracts, it doesn't look like the military is willing to look into that and rescind some of the obnoxious contracts. So a proper conversation now needs to begin to happen in terms of, first and foremost, de-incentivizing military coup, and perhaps thinking of how the United Nations could, in situations, inevitable situations of this nature, how to install an interim independent government aside the military to take control until election is organized. That way, the military should be made clear that their place is in the barracks and not in the government houses.
But we always see some level of resistance from these African countries saying they do not want any external intervention in their affairs. So shouldn't we be looking at perhaps African leaders ensuring that they practice democracy as it should be?
Well, when they make such statements, it is clear that they are protecting their own interest, because the point is, there is this saying in the eastern part of Nigeria that a slave witnessing the burial of another slave has only just witnessed his own, burial. So it is expected that they make such statements, sort of actually protecting their peers, because they are all the same. So when you misrule, you are making international intervention inevitable, because we all live now in one global world. I mean, a problem in Conakry or one in Abuja can no longer be seen by people in Washington or in London as a problem far from their bed, because one way or the other it has a way of affecting them in terms of insecurity, in terms of flow of refugees, and so on and so forth. So, yes, it is important that the international community intervene when they have to intervene, no matter how the African leaders look at it. The best way for them to look at it is to up their game and begin to install proper leadership in Africa.
But then also the sincerity of the UN has also been questioned over time. And if they are to bring some sort of rulership, do you think that the African leaders would win their trust, or they would win the trust of African leaders with these recent developments?
You are perfectly right in questioning, some of the actions or inactions, as a matter of fact, of the United Nations. Oftentimes, they have been seen as a toothless bulldog who do not actually have the teeth to actually bite. So, yes, that is absolutely right. But on the other hand, closer to Africa, closer to home, you do have ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States, and you also have the African Union. Now, if they get their acts together, the United Nations would have no significant role to play. So let us start from the ECOWAS, let us start from the African Union, who should get their acts together and then tell the United Nations, this is precisely what we want, it is fair and just, and you simply need to key into it. So it is insufficient for them to stay somewhere, blame the international community for interventions in areas where they have woefully failed. So there is a whole lot of, reorganizing, rejigging that needs to take place in all of these games. And
that has always been the issue over time, because a lot of some of the reactions one has gotten from this recent development in Guinea is that most people are condemning ECOWAS, that they came out to condemn, but when the people were crying out, they did not respond. As it is, what can ECOWAS do in responding to the cries of the people under a leadership that the people may see as being a dictatorship?
Well, for a start, we know from records and experience that, isolationism works and works very well. We have seen it play out in a number of countries. I do not want to begin to name names, but the point is that when ECOWAS is, united and coherent in their actions, the countries, the unruly leaders in those countries would have to get the message loud and clear that ECOWAS is not on their side, and when they are isolated, they will have nowhere to run. So I believe that ECOWAS needs to start from there. But the point is, they are not, because this is all about, national interest, or even personal interest of these leaders that we are talking about. If my friend is the president of Guinea, and he's behaving like a bad guy, if I condemn him, I'm going to lose favor with him. So that is exactly, and it has nothing to do with the national interest of those countries. It has to do with the personal interest of the sitting leaders, the sitting president. So they need to start from there, being just, being fair, and coordinated in condemning and isolating any of these leaders who begin to behave badly.
Now, let's look at perhaps lessons for other countries who are watching, because the question on the lips of some Africans is who is next as we speak. And so one is wondering, are there lessons to learn, especially stemming from what we see in Mali and now Guinea? Are there lessons to learn for other African countries who are watching what is happening?
The most significant lesson to learn is that African leaders have got to start getting their acts together. Lay down corruption, bring in good governance, eschew self-centeredness and opportunism. They should also do away with a transactional kind of leadership where they go into something because it favors them personally or favors their families and allies. That is where it is all about. They need to install, citizen-centered policies that affect the common man, rather than the elitist policies that we see up and down Africa, because that is where, that is the source of some of these problems. Take this same Guinea, for example. In the run-up to the purported and contested election of October 2020, over 90 people were killed because of common protest, which is their civil rights. I mean, they have every right to protest. Then a lot of people thrown into jail. I mean, these are the sort of things that citizens resent, and these are the sort of things that the military actually take advantage of, and actually justify coup. Now, I'm not saying that the military should be praised or that they too are clean. No, certainly not, because there are reasons to believe that they are not acting out of patriotic instinct. But again, when they come in, they often become worse than the ousted civilian government. So yes, good governance, people-centered policies. These are the bits and pieces of legislations and practices that need to be put in place if we want to avert coup attempts.
You mentioned something that I want you to harp on, talking about when the military intervenes, oftentimes they end up being worse than the government they took over from. And we are wondering if that would be the case of Guinea as we speak, stemming from what we see happened in Mali. We saw that within a space of 9 months, there were 2 coups in Mali because one did not fulfill the promise. And so we saw what happened. For the people of Guinea who were obviously jubilant, are there hopes in sight for them?
Well, I doubt that there is hope in sight for them, because let us start from the beginning. And the beginning is that even as we speak now, bloodshed is still going on. The gunfires are still, being unleashed because there are, within the military, we gather that there is a deep division whereby, some fraction is actually supportive of the ousted president, while those that have the upper hand, of course, stand on the other side of the divide. So what that means essentially is that rebellion is not something that has suddenly, that has immediately gone away. That will continue to play out, and we also know the unseen hands of some of the world powers who might behind the scene, while from one side of their mouth they are condemning the coup attempt, on the other side they are supportive of the other fraction that is supportive of the president. So there is lack of cohesion, there is lack of unity. That's one. Number two, you will ask yourself, whose interest has the military come to serve? The body language is so very appalling. How could they create even more uncertainty by saying that they are going to be in power for the next 18 months to be able to organize a free and fair election, yet they say it is going to be renewable? So what that tells us is that 18 months can very easily become 18 years if they are allowed to have their ways. Number three, how could they talk about renewing and continue to allow mineral exploration when it is very clear that some of the contracts on which the exploration is based, are actually based on very, very obnoxious conditions that do not meet international standards. Rather, what they ought to have done, if they do mean well for Guinea, is in fact to talk about reviewing some of those contracts such that they meet international standards. Yes, it might create, temporal opera in the commodity markets, but at the end of the day, I believe that is something that comes to the benefit of the people of Guinea. So ultimately, all of this playing out might mean that the worst has not actually been witnessed in Conakry, Guinea, that, worse days are probably ahead of us.
So what then could they have said that could have perhaps made for you a semblance of sincerity that whatever it is that they intend to do or this move that they took was in the interest of people?
Well, first and foremost, the move shouldn't have been made in the first place because it is undemocratic. Okay, but let's accept the reality as it is today. It has happened, and so they have the power. What they ought to have done is to be very specific about the fact that they are holding forth, and it is going to be for a very short period of time. I don't see what they are doing, reconciling who that can, that cannot happen within 6 months. And then after 6 months, they hand over to a civilian, government. Of course, the constitution need to be reviewed. I don't see why all of these could not happen as swiftly as possible, rather than telling the world that is going to happen within 18 months, and those 18 months are renewable. That's one. And then on the other hand, I mean, they do not have any business letting the world know that mineral exploration will continue business as usual, rather than reviewing those contracts that actually do not serve the interest of the people of Guinea. Rather, those contracts, the existing contracts that the military want to continue, serve the interest of the foreign powers that have been in the country, particularly France, United States. So these are bits and pieces of moves that actually tell us that the military is there for themselves. They are there to steal, to continue the stealing from where Alpha Condé and his, colleagues stopped.
One quick question before we let you go quickly is, you said something about the move, that's the coup, not being democratic. But what option did the people have, seeing that they were obviously not happy with the rule of the president?
Well, like I said, there is enough blame to go round, starting with, fellow African leaders who have, conveniently shut their eyes to the atrocities of, the ousted president at the time that, he actually carried out a constitutional amendment and became a beneficiary of the amendment. I'm not saying that a constitutional amendment is something wrong, but it is wrong for you to be a beneficiary of the same amendment. So it means that you are actually doing it for yourself. What did the fellow African leaders do? They shut their eyes to it, and they didn't quite do what they ought to have done. The international organization could have been more vocal and more, serious in the actions that that they took to actually prevent that from happening.
All right.
Now, all of those have happened. As a matter of fact, more, dialogue should have been encouraged, such that the man is forced out of office, rather than a coup.
All right. Global Affairs Analyst Collins Nweke, thank you so much for your time on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.